In one of my game design classes, I was assigned to first play a little twine/text-based game. I had no expectations when I had my first impression playing interactable games, such as Secret of Monkey Island or Counterfeit Monkey. After this sudden realization that there's more to this game rather than just reading through text, I was able to interact more with the environment than I thought I would. And that surprise of interactivity within games kind of like feels a bit fourth wall breaky, if that makes sense. And that is that same feeling I had when I was playing virtual reality titles. Since interactivity is both the main gimmick and feature of VR, it can easily make or break games specifically for virtual reality. Out of all of the many VR titles that I have played in the past year, I would say that Half-Life Alyx is the textbook definition of what interactivity in virtual reality titles should be like.
Technology the lock is.
Oh.
Wow, that's great.
The game designers have done extraordinarily well when it comes to making an interactive experience that make you actually feel immersed and feel like you're inside the actual world itself. Seeing the little details, such as picking up a water bottle and see the liquid sloshing inside it, and the beautiful rich environment that City 17 has to offer make it so believable.
The greenhouse being where the story kicks off, and the Strider there to surprise players with spectacle, we decided that the refuge could be a quiet moment for players, where they could discover more narrative detail in the environment. At the same time, it could be a place where they can play around a bit more now that they're acclimated to being in VR.
Another favorite thing about Half-Life Alyx is that they have partially tied the concept of interacting with different objects in the environment with the game's own game design. The collectibles that the player can look throughout the game is called resin, which can be spread throughout the linear map design of the game. It can be spent on upgrading weapons that the player can use, such as their pistol or shotgun. This kind of game design where the game gives the player an optional choice whether or not they want to search every nook and cranny of the map, further encouraging exploration by either throwing or interacting with objects. This is one of Half-Life Alyx's greatest strengths when it comes to environmental interaction.
Come on. Go. Wait. Oh, no!
There we go.
Another amazing game that takes notes to the similar concept from Half-Life Alyx that I've started to play as well is called Boneworks.
Give me land, lots of land under starry skies above.
Boneworks is much more different compared to Half-Life Alyx, but borrows some inspiration of its parts while being its own unique game, still inspired by Half-Life and Portal. It focuses heavily on the interactivity of player surroundings and tools even further, heavily emphasizing it by having players handle different types of tools in the games to defend themselves with. Ooh, Zoid, what's this?
It's just a lollipop. You should lick it.
Each item and weapon feel like they are different from one another, such as melee weapons for the player to test out. It has different uses for different play styles. An example of having to wield longer or heavier weapons by having to use both two hands. They have kept the little details, such as being able to stab an object and having the object stick to said object. The tutorial segment has also presented me the different types of guns to test out. Some of them are little pistols, and some of them are probably guns that I don't really know the names of since I'm not a gun expert. But the way that you must reload your weapons is having to actually reload the gun. It feels so immersive to do, like having to slightly memorize these actions when facing in dire combat, as Half-Life Alyx does share a similar concept when reloading your pistol, having to do similar gestures with your hands in order to reload your gun, instead of, pressing R on your keyboard.
We got a lot of positive feedback from our initial experiments requiring players to perform a series of physical actions to reload the pistol. Specifically, ejecting the clip, retrieving a new clip from their backpack, inserting the clip into the gun, and chambering around. In fact, it was more interesting precisely because it was more mentally taxing, as players would frequently mix up the buttons under pressure. But players themselves consistently cited this as a high point of their playthroughs. Because of the physical nature of the reload, and the skill required, players blamed themselves and not the game for the mistakes made as they were learning the reloading sequence.
I honestly don't know how to explain how cool this really was, since you have to experience stuff like these yourselves. But the way they implemented detailed interaction with your tools and weapons to, actually use them to progress through the unique storyline goes to show that they have heavily emphasized item interaction in their game's own game design, as they have took notes of what Half-Life Alyx did and sort of refined it even further in their game. Developing VR games is much more easier said than done, as developers must have to worry about a multitude of stuff when it comes to having the player interact and play around with their own surroundings. Examples facing hardware limitations depending on their computer or headset, like the Quest 2. These factors are important for the developers to keep in mind when developing these titles. It is important to make sure that their games are playable and accessible by all players. It's common for most new VR players to tend to get motion sickness. I did as well when I first tried out Locomotion. Most VR titles are offering different types of accessibility options to tweak how you move throughout your surroundings, having different ways to traverse through the areas, either by teleporting to one place to another, shifting around, or having some sort of indicator like a vignette while you're walking. There are some VR games that require a more different type of interaction in order to play it, such as social interaction. Majority of the gameplay in VRChat is primarily based on social interaction. To me, I'd like to compare it as the early days of the internet chat rooms, where people can say hi or wave their hand, and players have an actual presence and being able to, wave at them, or see me wave at them. Hello! There are also times where most people have trouble communicating for a multitude of reasons, either having some sort of disability that prevents them from solid communication between a conversation, such as being deaf. Fortunately, there are actual communities inside VRChat that are active and thriving. They tackle this kind of situation in the virtual world. Take a look at Jenny. She's one of the teachers of the Helping Hands VRChat community, which is actually a pretty big social group inside VRChat that encourages and teaches sign language towards a broad community of both deaf and non-deaf people.
So I am a teacher for Helping Hands. Helping Hands is a sign language community here in VRChat. We have a lot of deaf members, but it's not just for deaf people. Our goal is to not only educate people about sign language and the deaf community, but also just to create an environment where people can have fun, make friends, and nowadays we have about 2,000 members.
Though there are some technical limitations towards the VR controls to move your fingers around, but most VR manufacturers are slowly and surely innovating their gear to have more precise finger tracking in VR. People from the sign language community are actually taking great advantages over these technology, more precise signing thanks to advanced hand and finger tracking. While it's not perfect in some cases, seeing this actually being taken advantage of for great accessibility purposes is just amazing. Knowing that there's a tightly knit community that's dedicated to teaching ASL inside a virtual world of VRChat is just so cool to me. I personally haven't been taught ASL that much, but seeing and knowing that about their community just made me feel so encouraged to actually learn these type of stuff. Since there are not much people like me that knows how sign language works, that's perfectly fine, such as text bubbles to type out words to communicate, or VR pens in worlds that draw or write out what you're saying. Though my avatar cannot do sign language since I don't have that much fingers. It's my sword. Developing titles for VR is no ordinary task, due to its sheer size of complexity in many factors. But when done right, it gives the player such a memorable and exciting experience, and detailed interactivity is probably the most common gateway to give both old and new VR users this kind of feeling. As more and more virtual reality games and experiences are being published towards more consumers, developers are encouraged to make their games as interactable and as accessible as possible, and that is what makes VR such a magical experience for most people. Thank you. Yay, cut. Ooh. My god, I need water. Yeah, I got that. I got that on camera.